Welcome to the weekly podcast of First United Methodist Church in Costa Mesa, California. Founded in 1912, the church gathers on Sundays at 10 a.m., and we invite you to join us anytime. For more information, visit our website, costamesafirst.umc.com, or connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Well, this morning we're continuing in our series called Across the Room, and this is the second year that we've done this, and the desire is for us to learn how to engage in healthy conversations. When you walk into a room, whether it be your workplace, a family gathering, maybe even a virtual room of the social media, it can be easy to look across the room at people who maybe look different than you, have different experiences, different background, and feel the distance between you and them. Like, man, they really think differently about life. They really have different opinions. And oftentimes that can cause a distance, a disconnect. Maybe we even judge individuals who have these different experiences or perspectives. And so it means that we probably don't have a desire to enter into conversation because we think, well, it might not go so well, might have some challenges. Maybe you even have some family members when you enter the room that there are some challenges in conversation. And our desire is that when we enter this room, that we would somehow learn to have healthy conversations about some really important issues in our country. Would you guys all agree? Week one, mental health. That's an important conversation, right? Not just for our country, but for us as a community of followers of Jesus. Last week, creation care. That's an important conversation for us to have. Both of those can be challenging conversations oftentimes. Today, we are talking about the issue of homelessness. If you live anywhere around here, you know that we have challenges, and people have challenges, of not having housing, of living on the streets. Even on our property, you guys don't know it, but Bruce and I get here early on Sundays, and we pick up things that are left behind. We connect with people throughout the week that sleep here on the property, and the hard part as a church is we want to embrace and be helpful, but at the same time, we know that allowing them to stay on the property doesn't necessarily help them in the long run. It doesn't help our church in the long run. It doesn't help our city in the long run. And yet, if I'm the person that's saying, can you move along, it is brutal. You guys, it is really challenging. And that's true about wherever we encounter people who are in the midst of a challenging situation in their life. So we wanted to have a conversation to dive into this, to learn more about the issue of homelessness, specifically in regard to Costa Mesa and Orange County. And there is no other person that I would want to have that conversation with than our guest today. Her name is Bex Hayhoe. She is the director of United to End Homelessness. It's an initiative of United Way of Orange County. And before she stepped into that role, she was the founder of the Trellis Homeless Initiative. Trellis has multiple initiatives here in the city, and so Bex is the founder of the Trellis Homeless Initiative, and in that role, she really became quickly an expert and a trusted advocate campaigning to find ways to address homelessness, not just here in Costa Mesa, but in Orange County as well. You'll hear by her amazing accent that she's from the UK, where she earned a BA, bachelor's at the London School of Theology, and she moved here 10 years ago in 2009. I can't believe it's been 10 years. That's amazing. So if you guys would give a warm welcome to Bex Hayhoe. And for those of you who don't know, Bex really is a part of our community as well. It's that tricky button. There you go.
The button that says Mike.
Yeah. Bex is a part of our church family. And so today, as she is sharing, it's a little tricky when you're a part of your church family and a follower of Jesus, but yet then are representing an organization that's not a faith-based organization. And so Bex asked if she could talk to us today as Bex Hayhoe, right? Not as Bex Hayhoe United to End Homelessness. Does that make sense? And so obviously she brings her whole person, but there are things that she can say about her life and perspective and faith that she maybe can't say on the books for United Way itself. So, all right. So we're all talking to Bex this morning. So Bex, first of all, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Would you begin by just telling us a little bit about your journey and why the issue of homelessness became an area of passion for you when you could have picked any number of other things to become passionate about?
Gladly. So as was mentioned, I studied at seminary back in the UK. I apologize, my accent has faded pretty dramatically, but hopefully you'll hear a little bit of English and a little bit of Irish, but a lot of Californian, so I'm sorry. But my dad is actually an Episcopalian priest. I studied at seminary thinking that I would end up working for a church most likely, but wasn't really sure that was what I wanted to do. Ended up, while I was at seminary, just experiencing some difficulties from some trauma from my childhood that caused me to feel like I was isolated. And that feeling led me to wanting to work with people who felt like they were on the outskirts, whose problems felt that they were insurmountable, for people who felt that they were disconnected. And so that journey led me to working for a homeless nonprofit on the outskirts of London. So not the traditional go to seminary, end up working in the homelessness sphere, but that's where I wound up, and I ended up specializing working with Eastern European immigrants and clients who had mental health difficulties. They were kind of the people who were on the outskirts of the outskirts, and that was really the group that my heart kind of broke for, and so I got really stuck in trying to develop solutions for them addressing their homelessness.
2009.
Yes.
Why did you come to the United States?
On a crazy God adventure is the short answer. 2008, I came to the States on a 5-week trip all around the country, wound up in Costa Mesa for 2 weeks, as you do. Fell in love with the city, fell in love with Orange County, thought to myself, this place is great. These people are fantastic. Came back for New Year's 08, 09. Distinctly remember journaling at a house off 23rd and Orange. And just journaling saying, God, this place feels like home, but I don't know what I would do, and I don't know how I would end up here. But through a series of conversations with the pastor at a church called Soul Survivor that used to meet at Triangle Square, they ended up saying that there were some things that they were struggling with that I actually had experience in. So I sort of tucked that away, went back to the UK, talked to my spiritual directors and said, I think I might be meant to move to the States and go volunteer. It sounds a little nuts, but she was like, go for it. So I contacted the church, and they said, we think God's in this. 9 months later, I had given up my job, sold pretty much everything I'd owned, hopped on a plane, had enough money for 6 months, moved out here knowing that I was meant to get involved in homelessness through the church, and that was kind of it, and now it's 10 years later.
It was a quick 10 years.
Very fast.
Yeah. So talk to us about the challenge or issue of homelessness in Orange County, Costa Mesa. Maybe first of all, let's just address the word homelessness, right? And if I say anything that's not PC or helpful, please feel free to correct me. So homelessness, how would you define homelessness, or maybe how is it even technically defined in terms of the city or county doing some sort of checking on people? Help us understand that word.
Yeah, so homelessness, there are two main definitions for homelessness that are set by the federal government. One is by the Department of Education, and one is by HUD. The HUD definition is probably the most common, and that's literally where somebody does not have a home. So that's kind of the simplest definition. So somebody who is either out on the streets, living in their car, somewhere that wasn't meant for human habitation. Somebody in an emergency shelter or a transitional shelter is still considered to be homeless, according to HUD, so their homelessness has not resolved when they're in a temporary shelter. And the Department of Education's definition, sometimes called the McKinney-Vento numbers or McKinney-Vento families, that definition is solely for children. So HUD's definition is adults and children. The Department of Education is just children. It includes the HUD definition, but it also includes children that are living doubled up, tripled up. So we have a lot of that in Orange County, and children that are living in hotels and motels. And again, we have a lot of that here in Orange County. There's probably about 28,000 children under the Department of Education's definition who are homeless. But under the HUD definition we have, it's just under 7,000 people in Orange County who are without a home.
You've got a sheet inside your bulletin. If you want to either take notes or write anything down that might spark your mind, there's a pen in the back of your pew and that notes paper there. So 28,000 children
who are homeless under one definition. I would refer to that definition as housing insecure.
Okay,
in
housing
Orange
insecure.
County. Yes.
And 7,000 according to the federal government.
Yes.
Okay, so 7,000, your kids or adults and kids?
Adults and children.
Adults and children in Orange County considered homeless.
Yes.
Which would mean they're either living on the street
Yep.
or in some sort of shelter.
Correct.
Okay. How many would be considered homeless in Costa Mesa?
Funny you should ask, David. I just pulled up the number. So in 2019, in January, every community across the country has to do a count of how many people are experiencing homelessness, both in their shelters and out on the streets. And so we have to do that every 2 years. So in January of 2019, there were 193 people experiencing homelessness in the city of Costa Mesa. And at that point, it was 187 people who were unsheltered, so cars are out on the streets. And at that point, it was 6 people in shelter. But since then, Costa Mesa has opened up a bridge shelter, and I believe there are about 50 beds at that shelter.
Okay, before we get into that, I want to talk about why people become homeless, right? And I know there's the whole definition of, let's see. How would you describe people who are homeless, right? We tend to call them homeless, right? How do you use language that might be helpful?
I try to use language that is a little bit more elaborate than just homeless. There's a lot of terminology associated with homelessness that is very derogatory or demeaning. So there's a lot of words that are used that I really don't appreciate. The word transient. There's a lot of other words that I'm sure you can imagine and you've heard being used, but those words tend to rob people of their dignity. And they tend to put this sort of barrier and really kind of implying that somebody is other than us and putting that distance in place. So I prefer to talk about people who are experiencing homelessness, somebody who doesn't have a home, somebody who's without a permanent residence. It's a lot longer. It's not as simple to say, but I prefer to talk about people in that regard and try to use language that reminds us that this is somebody who is our brother, our sister, our neighbor, somebody who shares the same image of God that we do.
And when I say that, I mean, it definitely triggers a sense of compassion, and it causes my mind to think about that person differently, without a doubt. If you haven't ever done that before, if you've just called someone homeless, I got to encourage you next time you see someone to go, oh, that's a person who's struggling with housing or someone who doesn't have a home. It will change something inside of your mind and your heart if you've never kind of tried that on before. I'd encourage you to do that. Okay, so we have a population of individuals who are struggling with homelessness in Orange County, in Costa Mesa, obviously in our nation. What are some of the reasons why people become homeless?
You should come to the Homelessness 101 class, David. No, the reasons are not what you would think. So I can guarantee that you've read online the reason everybody is homeless is because they're a drug addict, they're mentally unwell, they've come out of prison or jail. You've heard that, right? Okay. It's not true. It's really not true. And the evidence here in Orange County, spanning many, many years of studies, does not show that to be true. The evidence across the nation does not show that to be true, because there's a difference between somebody's issues that they might have today and what caused their homelessness in the first place. And that's something that often gets confused, and we tend to just lump those two things in together. And the other part around that I'll say is that the most visible homelessness we see tends to be people who might have a mental health issue, tends to be people who might have a drug or an alcohol issue. And they become more visible because of certain behaviors that they might be exhibiting. But that doesn't mean that they are the only person you walked past or drove past who is experiencing homelessness. They are just more visible than other people. But the top 3 reasons as to why people became homeless in Orange County, the top 2 are economical. So it's related to our high cost of living and not being able to find jobs that pay you enough to be able to afford to live in Orange County. And the third reason is family issues. So that's death of a family member, that's divorce, it's separation, it's domestic violence. Domestic violence is actually the second highest reason that women become homeless in Orange County. and it's any kind of abusive situation that's happening. So those are the top 3 reasons why people become homeless in Orange County.
So we've got a host of reasons. We've got challenges here in Costa Mesa. I mean, you've got a lot of reds. I don't know if you're on nextdoor.com. Oh my gosh. Anybody on nextdoor.com? Woo,
super
boy.
fun, right?
It is a fun place. I mean, we got coyotes running around and we got people dying of like drug overdoses and homeless, just taking over the city. It's just a nightmare. You mentioned that the city has done quite a few things here recently. Why has the city recently taken, it seems like, more action, and what action has been taken in the city?
We are getting into some interesting waters here. Okay, let's do this. So I had been involved in addressing homelessness in Costa Mesa since about 2010. I sat on a lot of homeless task forces here, neighborhood improvement task forces, etc. So there's been a lot of different things that have been done to address homelessness in Costa Mesa. And the shelter that has opened is huge progress. However, the work cannot stop there. So the shelter will not end homelessness.
Why? There is a shelter. Tell them about the shelter. If you're not aware of the shelter, I want you to be aware of it. Why and how it came to be.
So have you heard of Judge Carter? So Judge Carter, so there's been a federal lawsuit that's been going on in Orange County. In case you're not aware, just Google Judge Carter, Orange County. You will have reading for days upon days. A lawsuit was launched in February 2018 based off some 2 issues. So along the Santa Ana riverbed, there were a lot of people that were living on that riverbed. So the sheriff's department went through and they were doing 2 things. One, they were taking people's belongings and they were destroying them without giving people the ability to get their belongings back. And 2, they were telling people they couldn't sleep at the riverbed anymore. And so they were in effect making it illegal to sleep along the riverbed. They were sued. So they were sued for both of those things. And so there's been a huge lawsuit that just settled for most of the people in the lawsuit. And so Costa Mesa was one of the cities that was named in that lawsuit. So around that lawsuit, including the County of Orange and other cities were named in the lawsuit. And so Judge Carter's main focus at that point, and kind of the pinnacle of this lawsuit, was you can't make it illegal for somebody to be sleeping in a public place if there is nowhere else for them to be. So that was sort of the basis of the lawsuit, and that came out of a Ninth Circuit ruling in Boise, I believe. So then what cities in the county were doing to settle that lawsuit was opening emergency shelters, and the judge gave them numbers of beds that they needed to open to be able to settle the lawsuit. And so that is what a lot of communities around the county have done. And so we have seen a big increase in the number of emergency shelter beds. So between 2 years ago and today, it's been over 1,390 new emergency shelter beds. And a lot of those beds are due to places settling that lawsuit.
Okay. And the money, was there money given to, or, how are cities financing these things?
I don't know, and I'm not going to speak to something that I don't know about. So if you're interested in how the shelter was financed, I would encourage you to reach out to the city of Costa Mesa and ask them.
Perfect. So in our city, Bex is referring to it as an emergency shelter. Our city refers to it as a bridge shelter. You said there are 50 beds there?
I believe there are. Again, I am not the expert on the shelter in Costa Mesa.
Great. It's at Lighthouse Church, which is in Westside Costa Mesa. And so individuals have been helped in staying there for a short period of time. There's another shelter that's being built that is a transitional shelter, is what you would call it. Do you know?
No, so I'm going to break this down. Okay, so you'll hear emergency shelter, bridge shelter, transitional shelter. Okay, so those are 3 words that you'll hear. Emergency shelter is sort of the older word that's being used a lot. You've seen kind of in movies people lining up outside to be able to get access to a shelter. You've seen in movies, kind of mats on the floor in church halls. That tends to be kind of what we think of when we think of an emergency shelter. It's a temporary stay. A transitional shelter is more of a program that somebody would apply for. So they fill out an application, they'll be interviewed, they're going to be trying to determine if that's somebody who's going to be a good fit for their program, but it's more of a program that you have to work to be able to get out of on the other side. And so there's a time frame with it, normally 6 to 12 months, but it could be up to 24 months. So transitional shelter is more of a program, whereas a shelter, an emergency shelter or a bridge shelter is more temporary. But the idea with bridge is that it's not just a roof over your head, that you've got a case manager who's helping connect you to services, who's helping to connect you to the system of care here. And so Costa Mesa has a bridge shelter where it's an emergency shelter that's trying to get people connected to the system and to help them end their homelessness as quickly as possible.
United to End Homelessness, though, is committed to a very strategic path. Tell us what that is, why that's different.
The key is in the name. Ending homelessness. So many communities across the country have actually been very successful at addressing and ending veterans' homelessness and ending homelessness kind of for everybody in their community. And we know that Orange County has the resources here to end homelessness. We also know it's cheaper to end homelessness than it is to allow homelessness to continue. And I'll share more about that in the class in a few weeks. And so we know it's possible, and we have an incredible group of business leaders, faith leaders, government leaders, nonprofit leaders who've come together to really help elevate the conversations in our community to solutions for homelessness rather than pointing fingers or blame or shame, and to help really bring that conversation not just from what needs to happen to address somebody's needs right now, but what needs to happen systemically so that homelessness can truly be resolved. And so while the conversations about emergency shelters have been good, that's not enough, because when somebody is in an emergency shelter, they are still without a home. And if we don't create more exits for somebody to go so they can leave the shelter, we're not addressing homelessness, we're simply warehousing people. So we're trying to elevate the conversation across all 34 cities as to how we truly end homelessness and change our system to be able to do that.
Best case scenario, how do you end homelessness in Costa Mesa? Like if you had all the money in the world, bam, you had everybody on board, how would you do it?
Okay, so if this number is correct, around 200 people are experiencing homelessness in Costa Mesa. Chances are I'm going to estimate here, about 40% of those people are probably chronically homeless. Can somebody tell me what 40% of 200 is,
80.
Please? Thank you. 80?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Math on point when people are staring at you is not my strong point. Okay, so 80 people who are chronically homeless. That's 80 people who have a disability. 80 people with a disability who've been homeless for over 12 months. The national best practice solution for that is permanent supportive housing. So that means we need 80 apartment units where people will be able to have the support that they need to address their health issues and any other issues they might have going on as well. So that's 80 people who need permanent supportive housing. The other 120, I can do that one, the other 120 people would be best helped with rapid rehousing. And that's a short-term intervention. We would need 120 apartments, and then we would provide them with first month's rent, security deposit, help with utilities, help with back-to-work programs, help to increase income to be able to take on those rents. And so that's really kind of what it would look like to solve homelessness here.
So one of the things in talking with Bex that kind of blows my mind is that the majority of those 200 individuals have access to governmental resources, whether it's county or federal, right? Through either SSI or, right? No? They would not have access to those fines. Not right now, I'm saying. But many of them could if they were walked through the system.
Some could. It's going to depend on each individual person.
Situation.
Yeah.
So some could have access to that, but they don't even have a way to do that. They wouldn't even know how to do that, correct?
We have a habit of setting up systems that are very complicated to navigate. So yes, so it's hard for people to know what they might have access to, and then even when you know what you have access to actually be able to complete the paperwork and get to the appointments and get the certifications and get all of the documentation that you need is incredibly difficult when you are living outside or in some kind of temporary situation. And a lot of people have lost documentation along the way. And so to be able to try to get back your ID when you don't have your birth certificate anymore, it becomes very, very complicated, which is where the role of outreach workers, which Costa Mesa has done an incredible job at bringing outreach workers on board to be able to help people gather those documents, work their way through the system to be able to figure out what resources they might be able to access.
You have been working in this for 10 years, and yet I know that this is a challenge that you have not just been working on, but it's touched your own life in some way. Would you mind just telling us a bit about how you have experienced this issue yourself?
Sure. Yeah, and this is not something that I normally share about, but this is my home and my family, and it's important. So I teach Homelessness 101, as you've heard, and I've been teaching that for about 8 years in various ways, shapes, or form. And I used to teach that homelessness could happen to anybody. And I knew that was true, but I experienced that myself in 2015. I was briefly married, and my marriage actually ended up becoming a very unhealthy situation. And I ended up having to leave that marriage as an immigrant, and at that moment in time, I was unemployed due to my immigration status, which was connected to my marriage, and I ended up having nowhere to go. And so I went from being homeless advocate, front page of the papers, interviewed by the TV, etc., to literally being me, my dog, and a suitcase in my car, wondering kind of what had happened. And so I say that and share that because the face of homelessness is not always what we think it is. And I know that to be very, very true from what I experienced myself. I was lucky. I had some resources. I was able to stay in a hotel for a while. And when my resources ran out, actually an Episcopal priest took me in. And so I lived with him and his family while I went through the process of a divorce, trying to find work, etc., and rebuild my life. But I know now more intimately than I ever did before what it feels like to have nowhere to go, to have nowhere to turn to, and the shame that comes with that, and the feeling of isolation. And that's why, kind of more than ever now, I've dedicated my life to addressing homelessness and to finding solutions for people, because it's not what we think it is. Of course, there are people experiencing homelessness who have addiction issues, who have mental health issues, but there are also people who lost their job and couldn't find another one in time, people who missed their mortgage payment, people who wound up in the ER who didn't have health insurance and that bill came and that knocked them out. And that here in Orange County, economical reasons are the biggest reasons as to why people end up becoming homeless. And so it really and truly can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm. So as part of our faith calling to care for those who are disenfranchised and care for those who are experiencing challenges in life, will you speak to us? One, there may be some individuals here whose hearts are really challenged this morning to go, man, I really want to get involved in a deep way. And then also, speak to all of us who would go, that may not be like my issue, but I want to be helpful. I want to make a difference in some way. Will you speak to those two individuals for just a moment?
I will do my best. So I would say, homelessness, when I first got involved in addressing homelessness, I was very much focused on the person in front of me and the needs that they had in that moment. And there is a place for that. But what I realized over my kind of 10 years in this country and a few years back in the UK as well, is that we need to go beyond that. that there are systemic issues that need to be addressed as well. And so in my work in Costa Mesa, for example, I wasn't really focused on how to work to create long-term solutions. My work was very much focused on people don't have a way to shower. How can we fix that? People don't have a way for their clothes to be cleaned. How can we fix that? And that is important. However, it's really important to not stop there. And because there are issues and there are ways to get involved that will help actually break cycles, that will help kind of disrupt the system that is allowing people to remain homeless. And so one really simple way that you can help us is through advocacy. And now advocacy can be as simple as signing your name on a piece of paper that's out the back. So we have a petition to end homelessness. We call it our proclamation. And we use that as a tool to when we're working with elected officials across the cities and also with the Board of Supervisors. And when we reach certain numbers of signees on that, we will take that and we will present that either at specific cities or to the Board of Supervisors. And it simply just says, I believe that we should end homelessness and that I want to be a part of that. And we use that. And so that is I'm going to pause. I'm still pausing. Okay, I'm back. So that's a really simple way that you can help us on the systemic end. You don't have to come out with us to a city council meeting, but if you want to, we would welcome that. So I would say, let me backtrack a little. So get involved. The person who's in front of you who's experiencing homelessness, treat them with dignity. Treat them as your brother and sister. Treat them as you would want to be treated. See them. We have a series of videos on our website, and I think one of the heartbreaking things when I was out filming for those videos was to hear how people said they felt, how members of the public treated them, and they felt invisible. People would not look them in the eyes. People would avoid them. People would cross the street so that they didn't have to deal with that uncomfortableness. So one way is to dive into that uncomfortableness a little, as we were talking about before I came up here, about having that conversation and treating people with dignity. And the second way I would just encourage people to get involved is with some of the bigger issues. We're helping to elevate that conversation for those long-term solutions. And if that's something that you're interested in, please come to the class or sign up and get our newsletter and kind of hear what we're up to in the various ways that you can get involved. But there's a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple of action steps. One, if you want to sign the proclamation, it's out on the welcome table as well. I really would encourage you to come to the Homeless 101 class, September 4th, I believe, Wednesday, yes. 6:30 to 8:30 here. The mural reveal is a great way to also support what's going on by being a host that day. We're going to have a lot of people here, hopefully a couple hundred. It should be exciting. And the whole point of the mural is to draw attention to the solution, which is more housing. And the mural, just so you know, is kind of a house. It's an amazing mural. So you'll want to come out and see that. And the idea is that it would be an Instagrammable location where people would stop by, they would see it, they would want to come check it out. And it's an interactive mural, and they'd be able to take a photo and help spread the word about the systemic issue. Yeah. So Bex, thank you so much for being here. It's just the tip of the iceberg, I know, of what our conversation is. Homelessness 101 will be a way for us to dive deeper into that. But would you mind closing us in prayer as our band comes up?
Absolutely.
Great.
God, help us to show the compassion that you have shown to us, to each other. Help us show the love and acceptance that you have shown us to each other. And may we be people who help each other to find our homes in you, our homes with each other, and our homes in ourselves. Amen.